So the big question for this class is, what is life science? And it's so hard to pin down an exact definition of life science because there's such a huge diversity of life. So on Earth, there is currently 1.2 million different species that are known. On average, 15,000 species are discovered each year. So it's estimated that up to 8.7 million species are on Earth. We just haven't discovered the majority of them. With this in mind, that allows life science to cover a large range of topics. So at the very basics, life science is the study of life and living things. And in science, we call living organisms or living things organisms. And sometimes we call this science biology. The prefix bio means life, and the suffix ology means study of. So biology literally means the study of life. So life science can take place in classrooms, in science labs, and even in natural habitats. So life is super complex. So there's not just one area of science that can study it all. So like we said earlier, there's millions of species that are alive today, and there's many millions of species that also have gone extinct. And so once a species goes extinct, they are gone forever. Organisms include microscopic organisms, so organisms you need to use a microscope, so they're we call them bacteria usually. They can be single-celled organisms. They can be complex and multicellular animals or plants. And so the different fields of life science study all these different types of living organisms. So this table gives you a brief overview of just some of the fields of life science. So ecology looks at the interactions of organisms and with each other and their environment. Botany deals with plants. Zoology deals with animals. Microbiology deals with microorganisms. Entomology deals with insects. Cell biology looks at cells. Physiology looks at tissues and organs and how they function, how they work. Genetics looks at genes, traits, and other inheritance. Epidemiology looks at causes of diseases and how they spread. And then paleontology looks at fossils and evolution. And these are just a brief summary of all the fields of life science. There's more than just this table. So in life science, there are two theories that overlap all the fields of life science. They form the foundation of every life science field. So the first one is the cell theory, and the second one is the theory of evolution by natural selection. So looking at the cell theory says that 1, all organisms are made up of one or more cells. It also says that cells are where all life processes take place. The third thing that the cell theory states is that cells have to come from pre-existing cells. That means you can't just create a cell out of thin air. It has to come from another cell. The fourth thing that the cell theory says is that new cells form when existing cells divide. And then most cells are too small to be seen without a microscope. The theory of evolution by natural selection explains how populations of organisms can change over time. So evolution's definition in the simplest form is simply change over time. So as environments change, so must the traits of organisms if they want to survive. Natural selection explains this happens and why there are so many different species on Earth. And that's what I'm kind of trying to get across here with this very simple picture, is that there is a huge diversity of life on Earth, and this is all due to natural selection. So there are two types of science. We can have basic science and applied science. Basic science discovers new knowledge. It leads to a better understanding of the natural world. However, it doesn't necessarily have any practical use. So an example of basic science would be studying how yeast cells grow and divide, which lead to the cell cycle. The cell cycle is the same in all organisms with similar cells, so this is great knowledge. But this doesn't help us solve any of the world's problems. Whereas applied science tries to find a solution to a practical problem or a real world problem. So an example of an applied science would be the development of drugs to treat cancer. So this is using knowledge of life to help life continue on. So usually applied science depends on knowledge found through basic science. They tend to help one another out.